Page 45, the final clue. We'll never know whether John's map alone would have been enough to convince Henry Whitehead and the parish council, because almost at the same time, Henry Whitehead uncovered the last piece of the Broad Street puzzle. One evening, sifting through the piles of documents that filled his study, his eyes landed on a single line that had until then escaped his notice. Death from exhaustion after an attack of diarrhea 4 days previous. It was little Frances Lewis' death certificate. Until now, Frances's death hadn't been considered part of the cholera outbreak, but Henry realized that she might have been one of its many victims. He was surprised that a young baby had withstood the illness for 4 days, when adults often died of the disease in a matter of hours. 4 days. That meant Frances had taken ill before any of the other cases were reported. He looked again at the death certificate to be sure, and noticed the address, 40 Broad Street, right next door to the Broad Street pump. Henry's hands holding the death certificate began trembling. His brain whirled, at last making the connections that had eluded him, and John Snow. Here was the evidence of a case of cholera that had started 2 days before the general outbreak in the neighborhood, and it was very likely that the victim's diarrhea had been disposed of near the Broad Street pump, which was the connection between all the other cases in the epidemic. Had Frances's cholera-laden diarrhea contaminated the water of the Broad Street pump and led to the outbreak? Henry got up. Despite the late hour, he knew John Snow would want to hear about this discovery. The next day, Sarah Lewis answered a knock to find 2 serious-looking gentlemen on her doorstep. They'd come, they explained, to ask about her baby's illness. When had Frances first gotten sick? Where did the family get their water? Where did their waste go? Sarah showed them the cesspool opening at the foot of the stairs, where several times a day she had poured out the water she'd used for soaking the dirty sheets and diapers. Seeing that the cesspool was just steps away from the Broad Street pump, John and Henry knew they had found the source of the epidemic. Page 48, Tool of the Trade, the shoe leather method. John Snow is now known as the father of epidemiology. Not only did he create the first map of an outbreak, he was the first scientist to systematically study the spread of disease, looking for patterns in possible sources. Previously, doctors only gathered anecdotal information from the patients they treated, and they didn't compare that information with data collected from healthy people in the area to look for similarities and differences. John Snow's method of going door to door in the area of the epidemic is now called shoe leather epidemiology, and is still one of the most valuable ways epidemiologists have of collecting information. Page 48, The Dirty Truth. John and Henry made such a convincing case that the parish council ordered the cesspool in front of 40 Broad Street and the well under the corner pump to be dug up. The engineers called for the job found that the brick lining of the cesspool had decayed, and the earth between the cesspool and the well was soaked with sewage. Anything going into the cesspool would find its way, and fast, into the water in the well. The cholera from Frances Lewis's diarrhea had traveled into the street's drinking water, setting off the cholera epidemic. A few years after John Snow's investigation, the City of London installed the modern world's first major sewer system, led by engineer Joseph Bazalgette. The city built 132 kilometers, 82 miles of brick-lined sewers to sweep London's waste far down the Thames. It was one of the biggest civil engineering projects ever undertaken, and it made London the most modern city of the time. Cities throughout Europe and North America were soon following London's lead by building sewer systems to safeguard the health of their inhabitants.